Welcome to the Internet History Podcast. I'm your host, Brian McCullough. Some quick housekeeping here. I'm releasing this episode in an off week because if you look at the calendar, next Monday is Christmas and the Monday after that one is New Year's. So I'm putting this one out today and then releasing the next episode January 8th. So taking 2 weeks off around the holidays, but see you then. Happy New Year, everybody. Second, this is an extra special episode because the guest, Desi Garcia, is a regular listener who emailed in a few months ago with some guest suggestions, some points and questions about things that I've covered or maybe haven't covered. And some of the things that she was bringing up were so interesting, I just asked her if she wanted to come on the show and talk about them. Thankfully, she said yes, and I'm super, super glad she did. Essentially, you can think of this episode as an oral history of what it was like to come of age as the web went mainstream. Desi is about a decade younger than I am, so as you'll hear, a lot of it is a sort of fascinating dissection of how that sort of brief generational window leads to great differences in experience. But also, talking to Desi gave me, I think, a much-needed check on my, frankly, lazy assumptions about how people experience the web. Most people didn't experience the web like I did. And I mean in terms of things like generations, but also gender, race, class, and just culture in general. And so because this was such an interesting conversation, hopefully I want to do more episodes like these. If you're listening, I'd frankly love to hear what it was like when the web came to Japan or China or Britain or Argentina, etc. So if you're an overseas listener who thinks they could shed some light on what it was like when the web came to your neck of the woods and came and saw and conquered, I guess, please get in touch. My email is on the website, and you can also find me easily on Twitter. I won't do a bunch of these all at once. I'll spread them out over the next several years. But yeah, I'd like to have more episodes like this one because it was so much fun. So thank you, Desi, for a great conversation and a great new mode of episodes. Please enjoy. Desi Garcia, thanks for coming on the Internet History Podcast.
Yep. Glad to be here.
So let's get the possibly rude question out of the way first. What year did you graduate high school?
I graduated high school in 2004.
2004. Okay,
2004.
So you would have been middle school age in the late 90s, like in the like middle of the bubble period.
Yep, I think I was in 8th grade in 2000, so that was when all the Y2K stuff was happening.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start with the usual then. What was your first computer? I'm assuming it would have been the family's computer?
Oh, this is an entire story in and of itself.
Go ahead.
So my first computer was, my family did not have a computer for a long time. We were pretty working class. Mm-hmm. So the first time I used a computer was at school. We had a computer lab. It was all Macs. I forget which one it was, but they were donated. So mm-hmm. It was probably around that time where Apple was really trying to like insert its machines in schools and stuff. And I grew up in California, but I had no idea that Apple was just, a 6 or 7 hour drive away. But anyway, long story short, it was a Mac. It was number 17. I have a picture of me using this machine for the first time. And, I forget, I don't know which OS it was, but it was probably, I was 6 years old and I was born in 1986. Mm-hmm. somewhere around like 1992, 1993. And we only had about an hour every week. It was computer lab day. You went to the computer lab and you could play and do whatever for about an hour. The teachers would tell you what, program they wanted you to use. And the computer lab teacher would set up all the machines in like a kiosk mode so you couldn't mess around with the rest of the machine. And so one of my first memories of using a computer was figuring out how to get out of kiosk mode. And I remember one time I got in trouble because I told all the kids how to use the printer.
Well, that's... So I want to just cut in here for a second because, this is why we're doing this. But I asked some of the older programmers and people what was it like to have to use time sharing computers in the 70s or something? But, in reality, for a lot of people our age and younger, computers, the earliest computer usage was this way. It was metered out to you. This concept of having your own machine is really, really more recent than we think.
Right. Yeah. So the first time I got a machine that was mine was in 6th grade because I had this excuse that I could give my mom. Now I'm going to have to type out my essays, and I need to do that on a computer. Or I have to do it on something. And so I remember looking at word processors, which is probably a machine that some younger people don't remember either. And so it's just like a machine that would only type. Maybe you could pick out a couple of fonts and that would be it.
It's sort of like a glorified typewriter, really.
Yeah, it was like a little digital screen. But we ended up getting a computer that was used. There was an ad in the Penny Saver of a guy who said, I'll sell you a computer for about $200, right? And his selling point was, I'm going to put on it 50 programs. So that you didn't get specs. You didn't get to pick, how much RAM or how much disk space you got on your computer. The selling point was, look at all the different apps essentially that you will get with this computer for $200. And it was just a guy who was just, putting PCs together, and it was Windows 3.1. It was super low tech, and it was about 5 years behind what you could buy in the Best Buy. So it was just, my mom wasn't really, sold on the idea of having a computer for personal use yet. She assumed that it was probably going to distract me from my schoolwork, that I was just going to use it for games. But that was kind of my first computer. I broke it on purpose. I was just kind of like trying to figure out how this thing worked. And so eventually I would break it. So I saved up my money. I had my allowance saved up from about the time I was 6 because I really, really, really wanted a Mac. But they were expensive, especially if you were kind of working class like I was. So I worked on that savings pile from around the time that I was 6 years old to maybe 15. And I had enough to get a desktop.
Wow.
And my dad was so impressed that I had been doing this on the side that he said, I felt bad that I couldn't get you the computer you wanted when you were a little kid, so I'm going to make up the difference for you and just pick whatever machine you want. So I got a laptop, and the OS on that laptop was Windows Millennial Edition, which is kind of meta in this. But I really look at that point when I got that laptop as when I got my first computer, because it was mine. I kept it in my room. I could use the internet because the machines that I had before did not have a modem in them. So the internet was mine, in my room, in my space, for me to do with it as I pleased when I was about 15 years old.
15. I was just going to ask what age that was. Yeah.
Yeah. Previous to that, I would just get little bits and pieces of it from school. In middle school, you could, we had a computer lab that was free and open for people to use. And so what I would do is I would get to school about an hour earlier, and I would just go to the computer lab, sit down, and just see what was out there.
Well, be more specific. Like, what were you? I don't know. This would be gendered and sexist to say, but are you checking out like like in sync sites or something? Like, what were you browsing and what were you looking for?
I was browsing the Hello Kitty website.
There you go. Okay.
So I thought it was really cool that you could go to sanrio.com and learn about all the characters. So it's just things like that. You would run into people's hobby sites. You went to starwars.com. You could learn about all of that there. So it was very much a kind of a learning experience. And then eventually you started, I think Yahoo Games came out. And so we spent a lot of time on Yahoo Games with each other once you could figure out. That was when like the whole thing about screen names started to come into play. So you would tell your friend, hey, can you go to the are you going to be at the computer lab this morning? Yeah, I'm going to be there. And so you go there and you try and get into the same room to play with each other and some other people on the internet. So that was the gist of it. It was pretty basic.
What was the big game on Yahoo Games?
I would play bridge.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if that was a big game, but that was just what we played.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, so.
And
sorry, go ahead.
Sure. The browser was Netscape.
Ah, yes.
And then I think maybe 7th grade, at some point, the teachers started to tell us, don't use Netscape, it sucks. There's this new thing, it's Internet Explorer. Or if there was a lag in the internet connection, that was probably not the software's fault. We would blame it on the browser. You're like, yeah, that page isn't loading because Netscape sucks. So I always use Internet Explorer. So I had no idea, like later, that there was a browser war going on. I was just, it was kind of cool.
Well, but I mean, that was as intended. That's why Bill Gates fought so hard to get that icon on off the desktop there. So at school, it's the school's provided internet access. Are you on AOL at all? What's your online profile sort of?
Yeah, so that I started to run into things like AOL at home, where I needed to find out a way to get the internet. So my parents, again, were also kind of, wary about the internet themselves. They rightly thought it was probably just for porn. But what I ended up doing was I got a disc for Net Zero.
Right.
So I signed up for Net Zero, and it was free, but it came with a lot of like conditions. So you had that ad bar,
right,
that you had to always see. Eventually, Net Zero would say, "Okay, your time's up. You need to sign up for one of our paid plans." And so what I would do is I would stop using that account, create a new one, and maybe I could carry this pattern for 2 months or 3 months. I think it was hourly based. So the concept of just always being online was just not a thing. You could keep the internet for free if you used it for 30 minutes to 1 hour. And so I was just starting to use it more than that. So eventually I got AOL. And
well, let me jump in here because I want to give a little bit of context to that. So again, this is the era when you have to subscribe to a service to dial in. You're not getting your connection from your cable company or whatever. But also there was this whole movement for like you could get free PCs, because I remember doing that in college. I signed up for CompuServe just for the internet access, but then I got like a $400 computer out of it as long as I signed like a 3-year deal or whatever. But then there were also things like Juno was one, and the Net Zero, like you said, and the idea is if you were willing to put up with a whole bunch of ads, they would subsidize your internet stuff. So again, it's getting back to that concept of, it's hard for us to imagine now a time when the internet wasn't just everywhere in the ether, like ubiquitous. Like it was a destination, and you had to work in a lot of cases to get online.
Did.
Yeah.
And on that point, I used Juno as well. And one thing that I figured out was just internet security back then was a lot more, there was less to work to work with. So what I figured out at one point was, I don't know if it's phreaking. That's when you figure out a phone number. So I figured out the Juno call-in number, and I set up a manual connection from Windows. And I guess the security was just really lame because I was able to dial in directly to the Juno servers and not have to have their ads or anything. It didn't know that I was connected to Juno. So I got free internet for about 2 years doing that before they caught on and just kind of maybe banned me. But it was a destination. I had to get my cable running from the phone in my parents' computer all the way through my room. Just
right.
It was
because,
very,
again, this was before Wi-Fi too. So yes, right. Even after college, a couple years into my so-called adulthood, like I remember the first apartment out of college, we're running Ethernet cables throughout the house. Because, like, I remember the first time I tried Ethernet, and, like, I took a laptop down to, like, the pool, that was outside this apartment complex or whatever. But, yeah, as early 2000s, you were still stringing cables everywhere just to get internet connections between rooms.
Yeah.
So I don't want to screw up the chronology too much, but do you have memories of Instant Messenger?
I do. That was something that I got into because people at school were doing it, right? This was a way for people to hang out, essentially, after school. So I signed up for AOL Instant Messenger. That was the way to communicate, at least for my generation. I didn't find out about ICQ or even IRC channels until later. Mm-hmm. And so I guess one way that you could express yourself and your uniqueness, very middle school, was being how creative you were with your screen name.
Right. What's your screen name?
Oh God.
You can make one up and lie to us if you really want to.
No, I had a problem where I made a bunch of them because I wasn't happy with my screen names. So at one point I had like 10. So the one that I used the most was Mexican Trans Panda. Mm-hmm. And it was the way that you capitalized. Some letters were capitalized and some letters were intentionally lowercase, so it could look a certain way. And so that was my screen name.
Well, I imagine, I don't suppose there's any places where you still have that screen name lurking in old accounts somewhere or something like that.
No, eventually. So we knew some people that would use their full name or just a version of their name as their screen name, and that was seen as very lame and boring. But nowadays, I just go for my full name or Desi, and I just leave it at that because just the screen name thing. You can't be professional. You can't live for 20 years with Mexican Trans Panda. Like, no.
Okay, I kind of cut you off there. Tell me more about when your whole social group is suddenly on Instant Messenger and suddenly that's where your social world is.
That was actually a good thing for me because I'm pretty introverted. And so it felt like I finally had a place where I could socialize with people. Maybe other people were homebodies, or there was something about not having to swim through and wade through the social scene in middle school and later in high school that was not present in the internet. So
and what is
people
it?
People were nice on the internet.
Okay, explain that to me. So, like, would like the cool kids who maybe wouldn't talk to you in school, they're willing to chat with you on AIM?
Yeah, that was the sense. It felt like everyone was just excited to be there, to be on the internet. What is this thing that I think people were able to just kind of set aside parts of themselves and just commingle with people that they wouldn't.
That's really fascinating. Is it one of those things where you're sitting there and you're carrying on like 25 different conversations at the same time? Oh,
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, you could just look at your screen and just see flashes because everyone is of all the people that were replying to you or not.
Did that break down any barriers in real life? Like, did suddenly, if everybody's friendly online, does that make it easier to be friendly in school too?
Yeah, at least just in my experience, it was a way for me to open up a little bit, because I was so shy in person that then, maybe the next day I would be able to have like a short little conversation with a friend that I met online, and that carried on. There was this sense of like trust, that people were nice on the internet, that you could open up to people over these written, these chat conversations that carried through college. I have some friends that I met through Facebook when that was a new thing, because when I started college, I was the first round of schools that got access to Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
There's probably like a group of the Ivies, and then like a handful of others that were even allowed on the network.
Right.
And I have really very close friends that I just cold called. I saw their profile. I said, "Hey, I have interests like yours. Let's hang out." I met my husband that way too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I want to go into that in greater detail.
Sure.
Okay, so through high school, like pretty much, because listen, I'll be honest. My memory of middle school and high school is my brother and I had a phone line that was ours. And we were on it, like, this is, again, pre-internet times, but we were just on the phone to our friends, as soon as we got home from school till like 11 at night or whatever. So, like, it's that era when you're so social. But your experience is that suddenly, or not suddenly because you don't know any different, it's all happening online. That's the natural venue for it.
Yes, I would say that's the case. It was this period where it all kind of migrated.
Mm-hmm. Did you have a sense of that this is new, or that, well, this is just natural, this is just the way it always was or always should be, or something like that?
My memory is a little fuzzy on that one.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say that it was new. So for example, when Wikipedia came on, we had to explain Wikipedia to teachers, and sort of, it was not seen as a credible source.
Right, yeah.
But then by the end of high school, the teachers would see Wikipedia as the source for information for things that were not in an encyclopedia. They realized that Wikipedia was just going to be more, it was moving faster than the CD-ROM encyclopedias, mm-hmm. or even the book versions of encyclopedias. So they were sort of like adapting to, here's how you should cite something you found on Wikipedia for a book report, whereas maybe 2 years before they'd just say, Wikipedia, what the heck is that? No, that's not school. That's not school worthy. So we knew that it was something new.
Did you do you have any memory of Google, or do you actually, a better question would be, do you have a memory of pre-Google search engines and then a memory of Google coming on the scene?
Absolutely. And I think that's actually what prompted this whole thing for me. I remember the first time I used Google. We were sophomores. I want to say sophomores or freshmen in high school, and we used to eat lunch in the library. So we would go there, find a table, and then after you would eat your lunch, you'd just go over to a PC and surf the web until the bell rang. And something that we liked to do was, each of us seemed to have an affinity towards one search engine or another. So I have a friend who liked Lycos because I think their like little mascot was a dog, and so she was a big dog person. There was a guy who really liked to play games, and so he went to Yahoo because they had the better games, mm-hmm. On their portal. And someone like me, I was the Excite girl, so I liked going on Excite because it was just black and white, the colors. And then one day we show up, and all of the home pages are changed on the browsers. We all, we launch Internet Explorer, and it's not Yahoo anymore. That used to be the homepage. Mm-hmm. It's this thing that just says Google. And we thought, what the heck is this? What happened to our content? We wanted to see a portal of things we could do. And we're like, this is lame. Like, this only does one thing. You can only search. That's not what we do. We use a search engine or like a website to explore, to just kind of browse and see what's new, what's going on, what they're changing, if they're adding any new features. But this it was boring because it gave you nothing. And I think they had the "I'm feeling lucky" button on there, and that was probably the most interesting thing to us on there. And then when it just gave you a random page, we're like, okay, well, that's dumb.
Did Google win you over at any point? Like, you're like, well, but this actually is better at finding things?
Yeah, eventually we just started using Google, and I think we just started saying Googling things. We stopped saying searching.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We just started using, like, we made a verb out of Google. But that was a pretty firm memory in my mind, probably because of what Google is now. We actually didn't think it was going to live that long. We thought it was, we were like, oh, this is just a new internet thing. But since it's not as cool as Yahoo, well, let's all change the homepage back. And so I think we all changed the default page for the browser back to something else.
Well, my wife is also an Excite girl herself. She always yells at me that I've never done a standalone Excite episode. So maybe one of these days I'll have to do that.
I was pretty sad when they closed my account. I used that email address for a while. Yeah.
When did they stop their email? Do you remember?
I think I was in college. Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about college. Where did you go?
I went to the University of Notre Dame.
Ah, yes. So, right, that would make sense. It's Ivy adjacent, so you were probably one of the first 25 or 30 that that Facebook expanded to. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So, is there any social media for you, aside from AIM, of course? Was there any MySpace or anything before you got on Facebook, or was Facebook it?
No, I did MySpace, and I did Zanga. And I did LiveJournal.
LiveJournal,
that's actually where that's like the little trickles of the foundation of what I do for a living now. One of the things that made me cool or valuable to other kids at school was that I knew how to customize your MySpace, and I knew how to customize your Zanga pretty good.
Well, people made whole businesses out of that.
Yeah, and I didn't know that I could charge them. I was just doing it for free. But that was probably the social media thing for me in high school was blogs, journals. It was a lot more long form, and it was used mostly for a smaller group of friends, so you could keep up on your life, on your feelings.
Which one are you talking about, LiveJournal or Zynga?
LiveJournal, all of them, all three of them.
Yeah. Did you compartmentalize, like, LiveJournal is for this group of friends and Zynga's for, like, give us a snapshot of, like, how you used it and why this or over that one and for what things.
Yeah, it felt like MySpace was the closest thing to Facebook that we had. Everyone had a MySpace because that's where you made a profile about yourself. You listed your interests, you listed the music you listened to, you listed your height, your horoscope, just basic things about you. It was your presence on the internet was through MySpace. And you decorated your MySpace using CSS and HTML, the way you would kind of decorate your locker or your room. Zynga and LiveJournal were places where you would write and kind of detail your life. You wouldn't really do that on MySpace, at least in my experience. And the difference between who went on which site was, I think, people who went on Zynga wanted to get a screen name that they couldn't get on LiveJournal, and you could customize Zynga a lot more. You could make it look like your Zynga was no longer a Zynga. It just looked completely different, crazy. Whereas LiveJournal had, I think they didn't open up all of the elements on your blog for you to customize. So that was how I saw them. And I was more active on Zanga because for me, what I got out of being on those platforms was the ability to mess with the code and make it look awesome every week. So
when do you get introduced to Facebook?
that was in college.
Yeah.
So at Notre Dame, we had a thing called the dog book, and it was just a place where I guess I actually never used it because I was on that last year. I was supposed to submit my photo, and it was just going to be like a directory of people's photos, and everyone would get a copy of it, and you would use it to try and meet people and date and whatever. But because there was this new thing that all of a sudden we heard about called thefacebook.com, we thought, oh, this is like the dog book, but digital online. Let's not bother with a print copy. Let's just go on Facebook because it's sort of like a MySpace. And so for that first year in college, for sure, I had both of them going. And
it was, you had heard of Facebook first, but then it was a thing where you had to wait for it to come to your school? Or it was there when you got there?
It was there when I got there. It was
Okay.
the first year that they opened it up. So, yeah, I didn't have to wait for it.
And so I mean, you're obviously within the first year or 18 months of Facebook existing. Is there anything that you can describe for us about early Facebook and how it's different than it was today? And maybe, again, the social aspect of it, because it's only people at your school. Your mom's not on there yet, right?
Yeah. And so I think when Facebook started expanding to other schools, I mean, I'm just going to be completely honest. If you go to like a top-ish school, sometimes people get a little like elitist about it. So I do remember people getting cranky that they were opening it up to community colleges, for example. But then more people getting cranky when they were opening up to
high school
companies or just cities. Yeah, at that point, they were like, what is this? This was supposed to be our place. And I think part of it was because if you knew that you were really only talking to the people at the same school that you were at, or if you were keeping in touch with a friend that went to a different place, it felt like you could post up pictures of you going to parties and things like that, pictures that you probably wouldn't post on your MySpace because that was open. And so when the network was opened up to anyone, your grandma, people, I think that was the first time people had to think about their privacy and things like that.
Did you have a sense of when, okay, all that other stuff is over, everyone's on Facebook? Like, did you have a sense of Facebook taking over and things like MySpace fading away?
Yes. I mean, you just said it right then and there. Everyone's on Facebook. Yeah. And
do you remember the controversy around things like the news feed? Like, did you ever personally feel like, oh no, this is they're ruining Facebook, or like I don't want my mom on here, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I did. I think when it became too much of a flood of information, that's when I started personally to distance myself. When it was more of a place for you where you were going somewhere intentionally, that was different. It was less of a cognitive load. But we would still waste time on it because you were intentionally going to everyone's page and seeing manually what they had, if they had updated anything. But the sense of they're ruining Facebook, I actually can't remember my reaction to the news feed. I think it was more when they started folding in promoted posts and seeing content that wasn't yours or your friends directly, like authentic content. When you started to not be able to keep track of the flood of information and where it was coming from, that was when I personally started to distance myself. But I kept my account because it almost felt like an obligation to stay on Facebook.
Why do you say that?
Well, I mean, it's the whole phrase of everyone's on Facebook. This is the way to connect. This is the way to keep in track with people. It's dumb to expect you to go to MySpace or to go to LiveJournal and to check all of these places.
Right.
It was implicit that this was the central place for people to connect and share information.
Well, I have a memory even of, because I was too old to have it in college, so I had to wait till it opened up to everybody. But people that I had lost track of because they weren't on Instant Messenger anymore, and so I remember trying to look up people by their old screen names before Facebook came around.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I'm curious. So you're saying that it felt like Facebook became the default, just sort of by default. Did you feel like if I had told you in 2005 that you would still be on it, people would still be using Facebook in 2017, would you have believed me, or did you think that this was, again, just something that was for college or maybe a fad?
Yeah, I would be, especially if you described what Facebook is today, I would freak out. Because I thought it was just going to be another MySpace. Eventually, it would get boring or people would just turn out, and that would be it. And we would go on to the next thing.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. I want to try to wrap up so I don't steal all your lunchtime. But two sort of bigger picture questions. So you're basically describing yourself. You're a part of this first generation that shared everything naturally. When you look back at it now as an adult, is it one of those things where it's like, yeah, it's fine, it's just like everyone was warning about kids watching TV in the 50s? Or when you think back on it now, do you think, hey, maybe that wasn't so great?
Which part wasn't so great?
The sharing, or even it sounds like the social aspect of living online was very positive for you.
It was, to a point.
Okay.
When I started realizing that things never die on the internet, so it wasn't ephemeral, right?
Right.
That's when I started to get to pause about how I want my relationship to the internet to change as it changes. When it almost feels like I'm not in control of what my relationship with the internet is. Whereas when I started out, even though I was spending still 6 to 8 hours just surfing, it always felt like I was the one exploring, and that when I signed off, because you still I don't feel like I can sign off now. But back then it felt like I could sign on and sign off, and that was it. I would go back to living my normal life. Maybe someone would read a journal entry, for example, but that would be it. And nowadays, I feel like my presence is always on the internet, whether I want it or not.
Yeah. So here's another way to ask that question. I believe you said that you have kids now. So again, you and I come from a completely different generation than our kids, in the sense that we were out on the internet free and unfettered because our parents basically didn't know what was going on. Will you treat that differently with your children? Like, will the internet be something that you will train and educate them about and maybe monitor and things like that?
Yeah, I think my husband's kind of in a very similar boat to his experience, since we're the same age. And we have had conversations about how we'll deal with the baby when she's older. And I think we're gonna limit her time and limit where she brings screens, just so that she can feel like she's in control. Like the internet is a destination. It's not just always on for her. I can expand on that, but Steve Jobs didn't let his kids on the internet at all times. He didn't let them bring the iPad to the table, for example.
Right.
He never really opened up fully about why it was that he chose to do that. But I think we all have intuitions about why.
Well, let me this final question. Then I want to ask you about IBM Watson. But now thinking back, though, would you say that your experiences, your formative experiences online, shaping your personality, shaping your social life, do you feel like it was a positive? Do you feel like being online in middle school and high school and social in college, do you feel like that it was a positive influence in creating who you are?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I love the internet as a thing. I love it. I felt like it helped me come into my own, and find friends and people that I had things in common with. Without the internet, I would not have, for example, my husband, my best friends. It's just, I love the way that it helps me connect with people around the world. It's how I got into, I guess, electronic music. Mm-hmm. And so that in and of itself, there's like a very global sense of family around that. It's how I got this job. The internet invented my job. So all in all, the internet is probably responsible for a lot of things that are most of the things that are dear to me.
So you're a UX UI designer? Is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Designer. Yeah.
Yeah. And so again, right, like you said, you learn that because of the internet. You do that because of the internet. You're at IBM working on the Watson team?
Yeah. So there's a core Watson design team, mostly based out of Austin, Texas. Mm-hmm. And most of what I do was I design interfaces, right? Mm-hmm. But the technology that we're designing them for is new. And so it's the biggest challenge that we face is how do we enable people to use this new technology in the way that they intend to. So we're not here trying to come up with something like a Minority Report kind of interface where everything looks flashy and completely new. Something that we've learned is actually we have to start from the basics and make sure that things are as usable as possible and clear, because you don't want people to make mistakes.
Well, because are we talking about like chatbots and things like that? Are we talking about like interfaces with AI and things like that?
Yeah, it's mostly the product that I work on is mostly chatbots, and it's machine learning, it's linguistic analysis, types of technologies that come together in a product that people can use to build out chatbots that are robust. So there's more to them than, a chatbot that can only talk to you about the weather, or a chatbot that can only talk to you about of cats. It can start to read in between the lines, and it can scale so that it can, handle like a customer service line on its own. So they're more robust for sure.
So when your kid is in middle school, is she going to be, is that how she's going to be browsing the internet through like things like voice and stuff like that?
I wouldn't be surprised. Yeah. Even I'm starting to want to browse through the internet. Instead of typing things out or pointing with my mouse, I just start saying the text on a link or the text on a button. I just say it out loud in my head and think to myself, why do my hands not move this fast?
See, that's fascinating to me, because I feel like that'll be the thing that they'll be like, oh, Grandpa, he's still using his keyboard. I never want to give up a keyboard. In a lot of ways, the fact that people do most of their computing on smartphones still kind of weirds me out. Like it's just been a part since again, I was in middle school. Like I almost can't think without a keyboard in front of me. Like that's how, even when I record intros for the podcast, I can't freeform it. I have to type it out. So it's like that'll be the thing when I'm 80 that will mark me as the old dude that isn't with the times. I feel like
that.
Yeah, go ahead.
To that point, I think you might be describing something else. So you're describing your mental model about how you navigate something on your screen or something in your computer.
That's
and
true.
so on a keyboard, sure, you're saying I type things out, but you also have hotkeys.
Right.
And those hotkeys are shortcuts to something that would take you a little bit longer time to deal. And so hotkeys on a smartphone are harder.
Yeah.
To work out. So your mental model is always going to go faster than the device you're on. And so maybe what you're craving is just something that will let you take as many shortcuts. And honestly, I think the keyboard is still pretty fast.
Yeah. Well, see, That's so fascinating. That's why you're a designer professionally and I'm not. But Desi Garcia, this is so fascinating, and this was totally an experiment, but this was such a fantastic experiment.
It was so fun.
Thank you for remembering all that, giving context for it, and hopefully you'll be the first of several that we'll do this with.
Oh, awesome. Yeah.
If this is the first time you're listening to this podcast, please subscribe to us on your podcast app of choice. There's plenty more great internet history where that came from. And if you're a longtime listener, then you know what to do to help us out. Rate and review us on iTunes. Because iTunes gives credit to reviews and ratings, and the more great reviews we get, the more people will discover us. As always, there's more info on our website, www.internethistorypodcast.com. The show's Twitter handle is @NetHistoryPod, and my personal Twitter is @BrianMCC. Thanks for listening.